Welcome back to the channel. I'm all about marriage. That's really what I am concerned about. I'm glad that you're here. Now let's get into it. So I ran across this particular article slash post out on Instagram, and you should be seeing it right now. And it's from blacklove.com. There's a lady, Raquel Martin, and she wrote an article talking about getting married for the culture, the role of black marriage in black wealth. And I've been talking a lot about this, over and over again. I mean, honestly, it just makes sense. No matter what we believe about the church or the world or anything like that, it is not logical to believe that you'll have less money, okay, if you're married versus if you're not married, okay? Singles don't necessarily have more money than married people. And most people, and a lot of ladies need to understand this part, most people will work in some capacity, at a job or their own business in their life. All right. So it's actually very few women that are sitting around not doing anything but scrolling on social media. And this is what they do day in, day out, and from 18 to 90, and then they pass on to the next life. That is extremely rare. So when people start talking about soft life and different things like that, these are things that just kind of get everybody's attention. And while you might find 1% of women that actually do that, it's always very interesting because even in that 1%, many of them may have their own YouTube channel or their own Instagram channel or their own TikTok channel. So they're actually making money through posts, right? So they technically are still doing work. Otherwise, you wouldn't even know they existed. All right. So I want to make sure that, we start there before we kind of get into this. And basically, I did a video on this, and it was basically talked about how the black family is dying. And with it, so many other things kind of go down, right? And while I do like to, constantly throw up numbers and different things like that, I'll be honest with you, you just kind of have to go through some of my old videos if you don't necessarily believe what I'm talking about. However, it's always interesting because, like I say, in other articles, they are referencing the same set of information. And so I thought it was interesting what she talked about here. So I'm going to quickly go over it, and then I'm going to go through some of this stuff. So one of the things that I thought was really interesting, and I know, like I said, you're seeing some of her quotes, right now. And, the first thing is this whole thing, should you just do it for the culture? And I think that no, I'm just being honest with you. I think you have to find your person. I don't think you marry somebody just because they're black or because they're white or Asian or whatever. I think we lean that way because we generally have more in common with them. In fact, I was driving to an event yesterday, and as I was driving, I was actually listening to New Edition. And I had not listened to New Edition in so long that I actually listened to about 3 or 4 songs, because I do have a little chip, basically an old little hard drive or whatever that's hooked up to my stereo. And I have pretty much my entire library on this 128 gigabyte drive. So I'm just able to, just kind of, listen to whatever I want. I don't always have to hit Spotify or whatever it is. And so I'm sitting there listening to a couple of things in New Edition. And then I thought about it, and I was like, man, it would be so cool to have a woman that could enjoy this with me. But, many of you know that I tend to date women, that are a decent amount younger than me. So while these women might know these songs, they would have not really listened to them in middle school and high school. In fact, New Edition is actually, predates me. When New Edition came out, I was actually in elementary school. And so what's interesting about that is that people generally, like I say, listen to music that centers around middle school and high school, and that's where most people kind of get stuck. So that is something that I really would not be able to enjoy with, a future woman. So I was sitting there thinking about, I was like, wow, I probably would never be able to enjoy this. But then I also thought that my ex-wife hated New Edition. She absolutely hated them. She thought that they could not sing. She did not like their boyish voices. She preferred a lot more of a quote unquote mature singing voice. So she never listened to New Edition with me either, right? So again, even though I had married someone who was my age, okay, relatively speaking, it still wasn't that we shared the same culture. Because it's not just about the culture of being black, it's also about the culture of all this other information that's out here, right? And me being from Memphis and she not being from Memphis, okay, created, this difference in the way that we saw the world. And so I think even with that, people do have to consider, those types of things. Do you marry just to try to save the culture when, in fact, even if one person lives in Brooklyn and another person lives in Manhattan, these are kind of two different, cultures, even though they're right there next to each other. So I also wanted to talk about that. So this is the particular video that you guys might have saw. Like I said, I'm not going to play it because you've already seen it on this channel. And all this guy's doing is he's just talking about that this is a crisis. It's something that we, should be paying attention to. Now, one of the things that I thought was interesting was this, and this is the core element, that I wanted to talk about here, because this was interesting because it's a woman talking about it. And she's basically saying, I'm wondering if, black marriage has gone down as, black women have come to a place where they don't quote unquote need men anymore. And that is really the main thing that I'm starting to learn. And I've talked about it in a couple of places. I even talked about it recently on Thursday Talks, because what happened and what really gave me this epiphany, it was about 2 or 3 things that went all back to back that kind of gave this to me. And it's something that I know a lot of people will have problems with, but I think it's actually a very powerful thing if we truly understand it. When we look at, just people, like I've told you all before, like right now I'm over a group, Christian Singles Connect. And up until about 3 months ago, that was the only group, that I was over. And that particular group, ranged in age from 25 all the way up to about 70 years old. And Christian Singles Connect, we would come out, and like I say, the average person that would come out would be between maybe 32 and maybe 52, 53-ish. But that was probably the average person that came out. And over through the pandemic and different things like that, we were constantly, doing events and all these other types of things. But then I noticed that once the pandemic started to die off, the effects of it started to die off, and other, people with other events, started to pop up, a lot of the people under 40 just stopped coming. And we actually had, I remember very clearly, we had this big picnic that we do to celebrate the birth of, Christian Singles Connect. And we had it in 2023, and there was probably about 75 people there. And it was almost a perfect split between those over 40 and those under 40. But then in 2024, we had the same event. We had probably about 42-ish, 45-ish people at it that time. And I think we had maybe 2 millennials or 2 people under 40. And I thought that was very interesting. And as I started to see, because I go to a lot of different events, not just, Christian Singles Connect events, and I would run into the people and I would start talking to them and I'd say, okay, well, hey, what's going on? And they didn't really want to tell me, to be honest with you. But over time, what I started to recognize was that the people wanted different things. And so those over 40, and when I say 40 here, I'm not saying exact, but I'm saying on average, the people over 40, they had their children, they were divorced, they generally were divorced, or, like I say, they had been the baby's mama, baby papa type of situation. And so they had done that. They had had their kids. Their kids were generally in middle school or, about to be in high school. And so they were just at a place where they were just trying to find someone to just kind of live out life. And then those under 40, well, those people were in a different mindset. These people were generally a lot more aggressive when it came down to dating. Many of them did not have children. Many of them had never been married before. And so I noticed there was a different way in which they went about life. and even dating. And even in that group, in the under 40 group, the women in that group, it was just almost like they would just do anything for you. It was just they would just bend over backwards for you a lot more than the women over 40. Now, the women over 40 were very aggressive in how they want to talk to you, but it wasn't so much like, oh, I'm gonna come cook for you, I'm gonna clean for you, let me rub your back. It was more of, oh, I think you're attractive, let's hang out. Where the people under 40, they were more like, trying to do things kind of leading towards marriage, saying, hey, let's go out, let's do this, let's do that. So it was a totally different vibe. And so all of this was going on. And then it really, broke down, like I said, when I had a friend that called and she was telling me that, she was dating this guy, been dating him for, several years. And, he had a couple of kids. And, his kids were a little older, like I said, middle school, type of situation. And this woman, she was in her 30s and the guy was in his 40s. And so she was just basically like, I don't understand why he won't marry me. He's not, he hasn't been in a relationship, for 4 or 5 years. He should be healed. He says he likes me, but he just doesn't seem like he has the urgency or that he'll ever get around, to it. And she was like, I've dated so many men and I feel like I just keep going around in circles because I'm never finding a man that's really trying to lock me down. And as I thought about it, because this woman, is very attractive. I mean, she's actually a pretty nice person. I mean, she does have her quirks, but, overall, when I look at her, I see a woman that, yeah, if the personalities matched, yeah, this would be a woman I would think that would go relatively fast. Not necessarily saying she's perfect in every way, like I said, but I would think, relatively fast if somebody would try to take her off the market, but she wasn't getting taken off the market. And the more I started to really think about it, and even right then, like I said, I had my group that I was going, I just noticed one key element. And I think it was, like I said, I had another video that I was watching on Instagram that just broke it down. And in that particular Instagram video, there was just a woman and she was just sitting up there and had her nice little clothes on and she was on a stage, wherever she was, and they were recording her. And she kept saying, we as women that have gone out here, we've done our stuff, we've done this, we've done that, we've got our money. We just, she was just like, I want to want you. I don't want to be in a place where I have to need you. And she kept saying that over and over again. She's like, I want to want my husband. I don't want to need him. And that is really, where it just kind of all broke it, down for me, what one of the major problems of the relationship situation is. See, we really don't marry people based off of our wants. We marry people based off our needs. And that's key. It's huge, in fact. It's much bigger than what people think. See, in America, like I said, even though I came from a 2-parent household, my mother would say these types of things, to me and my sister. And to my sister, she would tell, just like I've heard a lot of, black women say, she would say, well, you want to make sure, you have this together. You want to make sure you have this together because you don't want to have to need, the man for anything. And she would say that kind of stuff. She would, say that kind of stuff over and over again. And but the whole thing about it was she did the same thing with me. She didn't just do that with my sister. And I think this is the part where a lot of black women don't get this. A lot of black men are fully self-sufficient. They don't need a woman to cook for them. They don't need a woman to clean for them. They don't need a woman to wash their clothes or to iron their clothes or to pick out their clothes. Many modern men are actually very self-sufficient. Now, you might come over their house and see that they only have one couch and one TV sitting on egg crates, and you might think that they're not sufficient because you're saying, well, you could have more furniture and stuff. But as far as the man is concerned, he's not concerned about those things anyway. Those things in his mind don't add to his life. Same thing, there are certain things for women that, a man might come in and try to change, but a woman might not feel like these things are really adding to her life. However, years ago, for both men and women in America, they were taught traditional roles. You were taught that from when you were growing up. They didn't teach little boys how to cook. They taught little girls how to cook. They didn't teach girls how to do anything with the house, any kind of repairs. That was taught to the boy. So literally, if a woman had a house and it started to fall apart, she would kind of need a man to come in, whether she paid him out of her pocket or that was her boyfriend / husband, or the repairs would just go crazy or whatever. Same thing with the grass. You wouldn't see a woman cutting grass or cutting the bushes or anything like that. So she would need a man to come in. And because for a long period of time, a lot of the jobs out here were not open and available because of glass ceilings and different things like that for women, a woman would need a man if she actually wanted to reach higher heights as far as economically in the world. But the same thing would be true for the man. The man would need the woman because he didn't know how to cook. He didn't know how to iron his clothes. He didn't know how to present himself. So he would need her so that he can go into these boardrooms and meet these men and look the part, smell the part, be, up to date on any new findings. He would need her in order to do it. So what we've done as a society, because of fear, because this is fear that drove all of this, okay, we have made everyone so independent that now we're picky. Because see, the whole thing is like, and even the Bible talks about this in several places in Proverbs, and you guys know I'm always telling you about Proverbs and Matthew. If you can't read anything else, read Proverbs and Matthew. But it talks about, I think the quote is, if you are basically already full, then you don't want any more honey. But to the hungry, even a bitter thing tastes sweet. And I could be saying it wrong, so, I will put it up on the screen. But the point is simple. When when a person thinks they have everything in life, now they get to the point, well, I don't know, this is, you're bringing me food, but I just ate. So unless it's something that I just can't pass up, I'm just gonna let it go. And so that's the world we live in now, right? And the reason why the passport bros work for so many men, and it's harder for women to get the passport bro thing to work for them, is simple. When a man goes overseas and he's taking American money with him, and that money multiplies to the point where now he might have made $50,000 in America, but now overseas he's worth $150,000, depending upon what country he went to. Now you have women over there that are struggling. These women don't know when they're going to eat. So now these women, he can supply a need. And if that woman can supply what he needs, i.e. being a mother, doing the children, the whole thing like that, at that point, there's a need on both sides, and then both sides come together. When women go overseas, they can do the exact same thing. But a lot of American women have been taught that the things that men need, they believe that is beneath them. So a lot of American women, they don't want, to basically go overseas and then end up having to basically do domestic duties, cook, clean, and all these things like that, right? And I found another video, again, that I've been talking about, and I'm hoping, like I say, for the women watching that they get the point and they don't see it as me beating up on women, but I'm trying to get you to understand that a lot of people are marrying not based off love per se. They're marrying and they're coming together for need. And that's one of the things that I've noticed. And I think that's why it becomes, again, more difficult as people get older, because more of the needs are met naturally in whatever's going on. And the more a person is out here, like even for me, now, like I told you, I have a cooking service. I have other services that are taking care of things. So it's a lot more difficult for a woman to come into my space now. Before, I mean, if a woman came in and was doing, a lot of those types of things, I mean, she probably would have came in. I might not even liked her. But before I know it, I probably would have been stuck with her because I've been thinking, man, if she leaves, then I ain't going to be able to, she cooked my food. So, what I'm going to do? You see the point I'm trying to say? And this is how men do think this way. And I don't think a lot of women really get that, because men are attracted to those things.
And if you want your house clean, hire me a maid.
Okay.
I'm not a slave.
No. I agree. I'll hire the maid and I'll marry the maid.
That clip, sums up everything. See, a woman doesn't understand that men really appreciate when a woman does a lot of the domestic things. I think a lot of women, like I say, they have this desire not to do those things. That is becoming, the situation where they're like, well, I don't want to do those things. But it only helps you when you're not with a man that is going to a higher and higher and higher place, if this makes sense. See, when you're dealing with a man, okay, that has a decent amount of money, he can go out here and he can pay for almost everything. At that point, he doesn't need a woman that is working a job and bringing in money. And his mindset with her is not that she's going to come in and, like I say, lounge around. He is looking for her to come in and do a lot of those duties because that's where he has what? Need. And then the woman is coming in saying, I have need of you taking care of me financially. And while I don't think you have to do this, I'm giving you something that I think is the problem. All right. I think this is part of the problem, that we need to need each other. But I'm not saying that that is the only way you can get married. I want to also make sure that I'm clear on that. Okay. Because, people will get married just because they found somebody they like to hang out with. It always depends upon, again, the temperament of the person. Now, when we start to talk about Christianity, there is a need of marriage. Okay, if we want to say that we want to do right by God and we don't want to, have sex outside of marriage. And when we start to talk about that, there is a physical need for sex. And I know Christian channels don't like to talk about this, but it's true. When we have sex, we release so many happy chemicals within our bodies, okay, that the body is literally healthier. It becomes healthier. Okay, I even remember back in high school, and I know some of you all probably remember the same thing, and we would all have those one or two teachers that would just be mean. They'd be mean for no reason. You know what I'm talking about. It just every other day they just, going off being mean. And by the time we became, 11th and 12th graders, because, you start to learn a little bit by the time you get to that age. And then you would have one of these teachers and they would come in, one day, one of these mean teachers, and they would just be like, well, class, you guys can just do what you want to today. I'm just going to sit here and relax, or I'm just going to look into the sky, or I'm going to read my book, or, I'm just going to give you guys a free day, or you know what, I know your test was going to be too hard, so I'm going to let it be an open book. And everybody in the class will be whispering like, Miss Johnson must have got her some last night, because Miss Johnson is too happy right now. Right? And we all did it. And so we saw the difference when those happy chemicals were released, right? But the problem is, because that need, kind of fluctuates within our bodies, we don't see it as a major need. The major needs we see are always going to be food, shelter, clothing, those types of things. That is, like I said, that major push, right? So when you're dealing with, I think, one of the major issues with marriage, and like I said, I'm not saying that you have to do this and this is the only way you can get married. Don't get me wrong. But what I am saying is I think that's the problem. And I think it's the problem nobody wants to talk about. And I do believe, like I said, as people get older, this becomes more difficult. It's the same thing. I run into more women, to be honest with you, that had children, that they were able to get married, that said, I want more children. When I run into those women, I do see them a little bit more successful in getting married. But then when I run into women that they're like, I'm done with having my children, I don't want to have children, I see those women struggle a little bit more. Now, those women can get in a lot of relationships, but it doesn't seem like they can actually get the ring. And I think that there's again, that's that need. Does the man need something, from you? And so I think that that is one of those things right there as well. And I kind of hate that this video seems to lean more on what a lot of women don't want to do. But I'm always saying that if you find a really great man, he will bend over backwards for you. Okay, especially if he's leading like Jesus. But you as a woman have to find that man. That's something you have to do. And that you have to learn, out here how to pick, this good guy versus this other guy. Anyway, remember every other Thursday, we do Thursday Talks. That's when we talk about this kind of stuff. Like I said, we had a really great conversation talking about polygamy, recently. And if you want to see those videos, you can if you become a member. I rarely bring up membership. Y'all know I don't really talk that much about membership. It's only $3. You can join for 1 month. You can, get out. It really doesn't matter. I don't really do much with that money anyway. That's why I made it really low. My main thing with that is just to kind of give people a little privacy when it comes to certain videos. And I do want to, pretty soon get some t-shirts. In fact, I thought I would have a t-shirt here by now to show you because I've already ordered it. It's been like 3 weeks. So, it's just one of those things. But anyway, please like, please subscribe, and I'm going to see you all in the very next video.